Hey everyone. So wanted to do kind of a longish video, um, mostly talking about the Yakut knives here in my collection, and wanted to talk about some of the things that I discovered by collecting a whole bunch of them from different sources, different people, makers in different countries all over Russia, Yakut masters themselves. Um, anyway, but just as a backdrop, here's a part of my collection. You can see I have a bunch of Finnish puukko knives, and so this is kind of the Scandinavian side. There's a bunch more down there, but here's the most interesting stuff, the Yakuts, the focus of this video. So anyway, let's jump right into it. So let's choose a few maybe, just to, well, let's start with here's one example that I have from Peter Argunov. This is a what's called traditional Yakut knife in modern times, so modern traditional. And these have become very popular. This is kind of the rough, primal sort of look that people love going for, myself included. This one has a really good set of materials, kind of a great example. So here's the oxtail wrapped sheath, right? Kind of feels like, I mean, there's wood on the inside here. You can see that, right? They're pretty secretive about their technique of doing this, but they use oxtail to wrap this. There's a few different styles you'll see. This one has an inset for doing some quick corrections, some quick sharpening on the blade. You see the traditional horsehair loop, so braided horsehair, black and white is typical, although you'll see I have some examples of different patterns here, but this is the most common. Simple loop, the belt loop is supposed to hang on your belt like from the left side like this. So you take it out by pushing down, pulling up, blade to yourself for work, not for cutting things outside of your reach. So let's see, blade itself, this is again also a typical size. I don't have the biggest hands, but should have a ruler somewhere. Anyway, this is I believe 13 centimeters or so length of blade, which is right up about 5 inches, 5.5 maybe. The handle on this one is about the same size as the blade, maybe a little shorter. Here you can see, and steel on this is the Russian, I keep forgetting what it's called, what the description is, but it's 65G, you can look it up. It's not instrumental, it's spring steel, I believe. And it's a good choice for Yakut knives made in Siberia because, well, it's pretty cheap, pretty common, but also handles temperature ranges pretty well. So when it goes from 30 degrees Celsius in the summer to minus 45 or so in the winter, these stand up quite well. They're also pretty easy to maintain out in the field, so not your like S35VN kind of thing. But they do rust, so you have to be careful to maintain your knife well. Also, I guess I'm not that familiar with the climate there, other than it's cold in winter and pretty hot in the summer, but I guess it's dry enough, not a whole lot of rain maybe, because these things I've been told are not the best for standing up to water. So actually, if you are living in a wetter climate like I am here in Pacific Northwest of the United States, you may want to go for something more practical than just do leather. But anyway, again, so typical of modern Yakut knives, you have the asymmetrical blade, you have a little bit of a concave side here, and you can see they're left-handed or right-handed, right? So it's mostly for slicing things, for slicing frozen fish or wood this way. So that's why the fuller is on this side for me, for a right-handed person. This is the popular style now with the hammered kind of wide, um, rough looking, although this one's semi-polished. I guess it's rough looking, but it is polished, fuller. There's a lot of argument about these, as I covered in a bunch of my other videos, about the authenticity of that, and historical precedent, and practicality of having that fuller. Some of the more, the dirtier ones with carbon left on it, some people argue it is impractical and makes no sense historically, because as you sharpen the blade, you would expose some of that nastiness there to the cutting edge, and therefore ruin it. But there isn't a shortage of opinion about these. There's even two camps of how you sharpen a Yakut knife, as I covered in some other videos as well. So some people say you only sharpen from the convex side, and some people say you only sharpen from the flat side. I don't know. I've tried both. My feeling, I like doing it from the flat side just because it's a lot easier, especially if you maintain it well and you do it often enough. You don't have to do it much. Actually, stropping it works perfectly fine most of the time, and you can strop both sides, obviously. So anyway, enough about that. Oh, one more thing, I guess, is the profile. They're supposed to have kind of this egg shape, but it's kind of like with Finnish buko knives, or any Scandinavian knives too. You have a variety of handle shapes. This one's pretty narrow, actually, pretty elongated, but you'll see some other ones. Anyway, okay, so that's good, quick intro. Let's jump into this one. So here's one that I got, Alex Klimovsky. He is really interested in, as I mentioned in my previous video, he's very interested in recreating the traditional, historically accurate reproduction of these knives. And so here you can see his take on one of the many variations that have been documented historically, to some degree at least. You will notice right away, this is actually more typical of a lot of Yakut type knife sheath that are produced elsewhere in Russia. More rectangular, this straight bottom shape. Has a very wide hole, actually, this one, and a generous piece of wood on the inside. So, yeah, you can see the braiding. This is a leather braid, no leather sheath. I mean, obviously leather cover, very practical, very simple. Still the same general construction, comes out the same way. The profile is a little fatter, but still kind of almost a perfect egg, I guess. You can also see this is a red tail tang, which is not super common these days, but apparently was more common than on older knives. Anyway, let's see. So let's take it out. Oh, another thing about the sheath is this one has, it's kind of hard to show, but it does have the this inset wood coming up all the way, kind of halfway through the sheath, to protect it as you're taking the knife out, so you don't slice the leather. Because unlike Western sheath, right, on hunting knives, you don't have the inset here. Anyway, so that's enough about the sheath. So here's what he claims, and it's supported by the archaeological work that he and his friends are doing now. Here's one of the types you see, and this one has this concave side on the whole length of this, on this side here, on the right side. And he's saying this is basically what evolved into the hammered, stylized fuller that you see these days. This one is interesting because it actually has a fuller, a long, kind of thin one, fully polished, but on the other side. And this side is 1, 2, 3. There's actually 3 angles on this side. This small one kind of more like, this side is more like puko, except that it does have that secondary edge. It's not down to 0, not a full Scandi grind. But anyway, very interesting geometry on this guy. Thin, as you can see, kind of fillet knife kind of blade. handle is shorter than what they do typically now. As you can see, it just fits my hand. It's not oversized. Super light, super easy to use. I'm not a heavy user in terms of like you wouldn't stab it into something and try to pry things open, but excellent for wood. This one I believe is U10A. It's a carbon steel, Russian carbon steel, high carbon. Again, needs some maintenance, but good modern steel. So very practical, very nice, light, handy, but wouldn't be a super heavy user. Let's see, this one made by Denis Pikov, I believe, in Russia. Actually, interestingly, echoes some of those. You can see the sheath has that square shape, right? Doesn't have the wooden inset going up all the way, but is more reminiscent of that. The knife itself, somewhere in between probably. I mean, it does have this big oversized handle, does have a very convex side here, does have the fuller, but the fuller is nicely polished. That will not interfere with any sharpening here over time. Very nice practical blade. I've taken this out on a hike and cut a bunch of things along the way. This would be a very heavy user, very practical. Same steel, I believe. It does have, sorry, getting my Russian and English terminology all mixed up with these knives. It is acid washed, right, for more corrosion resistance. You can see some interesting pattern that produced. I didn't talk about the handles that much other than the shade, but yeah, so you can see this one's a lot fuller, a lot thicker. Nice big grip, full grip on the hand, right? Birch burl, I don't remember if this is burl or just Karelian birch, but birch burl is the typical thing that they used on historical and modern Yakut knives. All right, let's see. Here's one that I love, quite stylized, quite modern in its approach, I guess, but very heavy, practical user. If I had one knife with me out in the woods, this would be one of the knives I would totally not mind having. This is by Ilya Ivanov in Yakutia in Siberia. The steel is the Russian equivalent of D2, basically, and you can see again, this one is also acid washed, so you can see some of the interesting patterns that develops. You see this one definitely very stylized in terms of having all those forge markings left on the blade, right? And so this is very typical of the modern styling, right? Big handle, big blade, wider blade, heavier blade. This would be good for all kinds of camping tasks and so on. There is a fair amount of steel between this hammering and the edge, so I wouldn't worry too much about having it sharpened. But Siberian mountain goat bolster, birch burl on the handle, very nice. I put some linseed oil into it recently just to freshen it up a bit. So yeah, this is a much heavier feel in the hand, although it's still super light compared to, your full tang bushcrafters. So for the size of knife, this is incredibly light. Sheath, very simple, very minimalist kind of leather, right, with a very simple loop here. Doesn't even go around as a lot of them do now, so just through the hole and hangs. Some of the folks, it's hard to see here in this light, but there's actually, see, you can't see the wood there because they put some padding on top of it to protect. So it's actually really nice, really quiet. Took a few days to kind of work it in, but very nice feel. You have that little snap you can see, you can hear, sorry, from the wooden insert here. And they go up to here, so it's a generous amount of wood on the inside there. Okay, so let's see what else we got. Maybe try one of these guys. Here's a very big one. A little oversized, even bigger than the last one, although it's a lot slimmer. But again, you can see some of the modern techniques, right? And this is, again, has the acid wash finish on the blade to protect them. This is the same U10, I think, steel. Very nice, generous, big handle, so this would be an awesome slicer. This type of, I believe this is, I don't remember, I mean, this is all leather, calf leather, I think, maybe. Oh, this one is nice. You'll see it on some other knives too. The sheath, some of them do this rounding on the edges here. Oh, this one's easy to see, I think. Maybe not in this light, but there is wooden insert that's unprotected in here that's easy to see. So yeah, super light, super easy to use. Let's see. For comparison, so still staying with Siberian Yakut knives. This is a very practical, modern day, but actually follows a lot of the traditional tricks, I think. Narrow, like, it's got a fuller, it's almost full, though kind of almost like that old style, right? The blade's slimmer. You can see also in this profile, right, the blade is very narrow, very tapering off on the edge here. A lot of them actually do have, and this I believe comes from the old days as well, a little bit of a clip point here on this side. This one's also, it's hard to say on them sometimes, maybe it's a little bit convex, but I think it's basically flat. Super aggressive cutter. I mean, this one is the best slicer for like just doing house chores. This is my choice, usually the go-to knife. Again, same steel, I think, U10 with that corrosion protection on it from an acid wash. Very light, very simple, very clean. The sheath also, nothing fancy about it, but super practical, secure, light, just grab it and do stuff. And then I got a smaller one from the same maker, also has a little hole here. This one's really handy for small tasks, opening up boxes when you don't need the big long blade. Just around the house, super thin, but sturdy and nice, same construction. You can see the handle is just big enough for my hand. Still generous amount of blade, kind of hard to see, right? But same blade, this one's got the clean fuller, small. Also flat, and these are down to 0, so not a lot of people these days. Some of them do have the secondary edge, especially on the bigger, heavier blades, but these two are so light, so simple, clean, they come down to 0 on this side, so you get interesting performance from them. Okay, so let's see, let's finish up some of these. This one is one of my favorite go-tos, bigger, kind of heavier jobs, just beater knife that I love. Has a very generous, oversized handle, so here's what I'm talking about, very big egg here. Fills the hand, feels great though, still light, has that much thicker blade, and it does have these forging marks, so it is stylized to some degree, but it's very simple, very traditional. It's got those, I don't know what they're called, those insets to keep the blade in place. This is again the 65G simple Russian steel. This performs like nothing else I have. I think the reason is because it's got this crazy geometry where it's slightly convex on both sides. Actually, this one's a little more convex than this, but even this one's a little rounded. It's not flat like a lot of the people do now. So even though it's a heftier, thicker blade, it actually performs beautifully and holds up really well, and the edge holds up great. So I take this one outside to do like yard tasks and stuff, and I've taken it into the woods for a short hike with kids and cut up a bunch of sticks, and yeah, it performs amazingly. This is Boris Ustinov. Sorry, I keep mixing that up. It's Ustin Borisov, the other way. So anyway, one of my favorite knives overall. And then I got to cap off the Yakut section. Here's a much more, much nicer, I guess, much more, I don't even know what to call it. It's an amazing package. This is Tarabukin, Sergei Tarabukin. He's one of the best known smith knife makers in Yakutia right now. This blade, I think it's still 65G. You can see the tapering line here. Very cool. He has this like interesting style on this side with this full hammered fuller. Again, practicality can be disputed depending on how you sharpen it, but I can tell you this one works amazing. The feel in the hand, the way he oils his handles is just amazing. It's just, you just want to keep it, don't want to let it go. You can see this one's more pointy in terms of the egg shape on the top. So, you know, it depends on your hands, depends on the size and what you're using it for, but for some things it's better, for some things it's going to start cutting into your fingers, depends. Oxtail sheath, here's what I was talking about, that horsehair loop. That is, as you can see, braided, smaller, white, whatever, it's not quite white. No black in this one, so one color, less common, but it does have that hanging section. And here's another one from the same guy with a leather sheath and the more common braid, although his pattern's a little interesting here, not your typical one. But the black and white has that bear claw, it's kind of homage, I guess, to the old days when people believed in spirits and all that, right? And the bear spirit was supposed to protect the hunter. And yeah, same section hanging down. This one's amazing for the price. I mean, you can't get anything in the West close to this handmade Damascus blade. Nice polished fuller. Amazing blade. Has super comfortable polished handle. That's the profile. Amazing burl on the handle. This is mammoth tusk. Sorry, can't focus on it in this light. The sun just came up. I don't know, that's a little better. And then I think this part here is also mammoth tusk, and this is the mountain goat. So yeah, he makes stuff like this. I cut stuff with it just to test it out, and it's a fully performing knife. Would be great. It's just I don't think I would put a lot of work on this knife just because it's so beautiful as a package, but fully functional. All of them are. All right, so super long video. Sorry, folks. So anyway, to talk about some of the other. So here's one from Russia that I have that is absolutely amazing. This guy works with a lot of Siberian smiths, Yakut smith. This is from Steel Tusks. A little hard to see. This is the Russian D2 equivalent. This handle is absolutely amazing. This is birch and birch bark. Birch bark is second to none. It's an amazing material. Just feels so good to handle. The shape is perfect, at least for my hands. This is kind of like my go-to one knife. It's supposed to be a necker. It's a little too big and heavy for me to carry as a necker all the time probably, but if I need it a little sturdier, and you can see it's pretty thick. Yakut-type knife with me, made of at least semi-stainless steel, this would be amazing. Great knives, great work by these guys. Alright, almost through. Here's an example of another Russian maker. Forgot the name, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on it right now, but there's a lot of these you will see kind of in this style where there's a exposed, this is more Scandinavian style I think than the traditional Yakut style, or maybe other Siberian tribes, people, not Yakuts necessarily, but the exposed piece on the bottom, kind of like this one from Mats Lindmark I have from Sweden, right? Except that it's perfectly straight, and then has that leather section on top. A lot of them are made as neck knives, although this one's pretty big and heavy for a neck knife. I mean, the neck knife I'm wearing. But can be, especially if you kind of, it's held together with a chest strap on your backpack or something. It's still pretty light. This one's really interesting. Very convex shape on this one. The blade is not that thick, but it's generous. Very nice geometry. This one cuts like a charm. Has a very stylized hammering here. I love it. That's why I got it. Partly for the sheath and partly for that crazy pattern there that you see. Cuts very well. A little rough on the handle, but it's a great user. So here's a different style. Don't see these coming out of Yakutia though. And then here's this guy, Anton Salnikov. He was the guy that I first talked to about these knives before I started ordering them from Russia. He's in Canada, learned from one of the Russian makers who learned from one of the Yakut makers. Traditional materials, I guess, more or less. Well, this is, I believe this is maple burl, not birch burl, because that's what's available in Canada, where he lives. This is a small one that I got actually for one of my kids. Ball bearing steel. You can see it's been used and resharpened a bit and has some patina on it. But yeah, his interpretation of those knives, you can go check it out. He's got that A on the blade. Siberian forged knives. If you search for those on Google, this will come up. Okay. So to wrap it up, I mean, so here's one more. I'll just show it as I talk through it. This is Ivan Timofeyev, probably the cleanest, nicest knives of Yakut type that I've seen. Just so well made, amazing, everything, fit and finish, balance, performance. They're just, yeah, probably my favorite in terms of overall. Thinking of getting another smaller one for and a rougher finish to have as a user. But anyway, oh yeah, and the sheath is very nice as well. I don't have a couple other ones here, but this is a great example. So you can see that really nice feeling, soft leather, padded feeling. Everything's perfect. He's got the wooden insert in here as well to protect the sheath from the blade as you're taking it out. Geometry is, I don't know, I think it might be fully flat. It's hard to tell, maybe a little bit convex, maybe even on both sides. I don't know, really hard to tell with these guys. Not that thin of a blade actually, could be a user. Very nice though. So yeah, anyway, so what I wanted to say is there's definitely a style with modern Yakut knives. There's lots of styles. There's styles from Yakut masters which break up into several other styles, and you can see, the polished clean blades, the rough hammered ones, all the stuff in between, but they all kind of share more with each other than the Russian guys usually. And then, yeah, there are those styles. There's a few of them, like, that one that I showed, and the one from Dennis there. So, a lot of the historical research is still ongoing, and some of the origins have been lost, obviously, so you can argue to death about all these things, but that in the end, it's what works for you and for what task, right? And a lot of them, I mean, some of them are pretty practical all around. Some of them, like these lighter ones, obviously you don't want to pry anything with them. You don't want to do anything super heavy, but if you need to slice through a cardboard box, that will do it much better than your big kind of more bushcrafter style one. Bigger handles for bigger hands, or depending on what you're cutting, kind of animals you're hunting, or if you're working with fish, if hardwoods, frozen fish, or soft tissue, or whatnot. It depends, right? And there isn't the right or wrong answer, I think, and some people make this into religious arguments, but to me, they all have a beauty in them. Some are more, they're all functional. Some are probably more suited for collections. Some are definitely something I will grab and use around the house, and some are ones that I would take out in the woods. But it all depends. Depends on what you need from it right then and there. There isn't really, I couldn't say that, oh my God, now everybody needs to make them like they used to, right? And all the new ones are wrong. But at the same time, there's definitely that primal beauty in these guys, and there's functionality that was developed through centuries. But then again, some of the modern techniques and materials and all that have brought some improvements in some areas, right? So hopefully an interesting overview of some of the stuff. There's some more that I didn't cover individually, but I think I touched on all the general styles and features of these guys, and maybe I'll do another one sometime to go into some specifics and hopefully go outside and do some cutting, show off how they work, although it's kind of hard to see in a video how they do. You really have to hold it in your hand and just do the slicing to see how nice it works, and some of the drilling with them and so on. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I hope this was interesting.